Welcome to Moonbeaming, a podcast about lunar living, magic, creativity, tarot, and more. I'm your host, Sarah Faith Gottesdiener, and I'm so honored and excited to be here with you today. Hi, and welcome back. I hope that you are doing as well as can be. I know the end of the Gregorian year, it can be an odd time. It can be a lot. For me, I'm often pretty exhausted, not gonna lie. I run a business that has a very busy holiday season, and the accumulation of really not just this year, but many years, I'm feeling in my bones. And also, this time of year fills me with so much gratitude. And I have so much gratitude for all of y'all for being here. I want to thank you so much for being here. So many folks shared that this was their most listened to podcast. It made me so happy. I'm glad that this project could give you some solace, comfort, wisdom, maybe even a little bit of entertainment. This year, I had no idea what would happen with this podcast. And it's been really remarkable. It's 29th in the spiritual podcast charts. It has over 380,000 downloads and many, many, many more streams, which is kind of wild for an independent podcast. And we don't promote or advertise. I just promote on my newsletter and on the only social media I have, which is Instagram and Twitter. I'm on Twitter, but I'm so off and on Twitter. Anywho's, most importantly, I have hosted some brilliant conversations with some truly amazing people. I really wanted to create a space that fostered the kind of deep and enriching and real conversations about life. I really wanted to have a podcast where folks could get into the depths of life. One of my main purposes in life, we have many, like we all have dozens of life purposes, but one of them is to make others feel less alone. And I do know that Moonbeaming does that. And that's what I've done. Thanks to the incredible guests. Thanks to you being here. And that is what I call a success. And the only way I've been able to do this is because of my Patreon. I pay the editor of this podcast. I pay an assistant producer. And I spend a lot of time on this project. And after season 1, I realized I couldn't do it without financial support. So I asked for support and I started a Patreon. And thank you, patrons. Without your support, this podcast would not exist. Seriously, know that. Please know that. And know that I appreciate you patrons so much. I just want to mention this. If you have enjoyed this podcast, if you've gotten things out of it, if it's enhanced your life, if it's made you feel less alone, if it's taught you anything and you have the means, please consider supporting it on Patreon. Depending on the tier, you'll get goodies like tarot spreads, extra episodes, and our monthly guide. There's a little community building over there, and it's really sweet. The Patreon is the best way to sustain this podcast and make sure that it keeps going. And of course, there's a link in the show notes to join. And of course, if you don't have the means, if you're not interested in supporting and sustaining this podcast through the Patreon, there are a lot of free ways to support this show. You can subscribe if you have not. You can rate and review if you have not. And you can share with friends or on social media. This helps get the word out. It helps the podcast show up more on the algorithm and helps it reach more people. Everything I do basically is word of mouth. And that's how I roll. It's how I've been doing things. So I appreciate all of it. To everyone who has reviewed, shared, subscribed, thank you so much. It truly warms my heart and fills me with so much joy. So on to this week's episode. As we all know, this year it is a 5-year. And so I have gone into deeper dives with the Hierophant and with the minor arcana 5s. We've done 5 of Pentacles, 5 of Swords, and the 5 of Wands. And today we are going to explore some of the messages of the 5 of Cups. Are you excited? I'm excited. To do the briefest recap, let's situate ourselves in the overarching themes of the 5s and what is kind of in common in all of the different suits. Yes, they are all different. The cards have different meanings, but the 5s usually come up when we're at some kind of crossroads. There's some breakdowns, breakthroughs. There's some lack, some loss, some scarcity happening, either internally or externally. It's where we realize things aren't working. Important things like the very material of our life. It's where we realize that the story we've been telling maybe isn't accurate or it's time for a different story. It's where we reckon with the fact that the structures that we've created are not going to get us where we want or need to go. They've gotten us this far, but now we've got to build some new ones. If we're thinking about plot lines of a movie, this is the place where the character first experiences a moment of hardship or a test. In our lives, it sometimes feels like it's the moment when you feel like you've just gotten some footing, you've just caught your breath, and now there's another issue. Something else happens. And in order to be able to keep going, you've got to fundamentally change in some way. There's also usually clarity around the systems or behaviors or beliefs or patterns that have got you here so that they can be rearranged. In my personal teaching, I also believe the 5s underscore the greater systems at play here, whether we're talking about society, the patriarchy, white supremacy, a profound belief system you've internalized that intersects with what's going on here. It could also be you and a larger system like a corporation you work in or academia, like a school or institution you're involved in some way. What we have control over and what we don't tends to come up with the 5s. And ultimately, these are all opportunities to heal some core wounds, because oftentimes what happens when we're in a 5 zone, 2021, what often comes up is that the suffering you are experiencing is related to a core wound, a core belief or core behavior that has got to go. Something is happening that is bringing up our deepest triggers, insecurities, our activations, our freakouts, our panics, whatever is coming up. Those core wounds like abandonment, extraction, those core beliefs like, what's a common one? I'll never be good enough, or I'll always be alone, or good things happen to other people, but not me, or I deserve it, or whatever it is, so on and so on. We could be here all day with those. I think you're picking up what I'm putting down, and we've all got them, by the way, and they all flare up and come up in various parts of our lives. And when they come up or flare up, or we are confronted with them for the first time or the 500th time, we have a choice. We can keep doing it the way it's been done, or we can change. And that's why they're so painful. Yes, sometimes a 5 will come up and it's simply about a messed up situation. Like it's not you, but it's just something going down that isn't great. When a 5 will come up in a future position, in a spread, in a divinatory way, generally, it means that whatever it is you're embarking on is probably not going to end amazingly. And at the very least, it's not going to end up how you want it to, or that whatever is going to transpire will be difficult, though not impossible. Maybe it'll be challenging, but inevitably, there are going to be situations coming up that is going to force us to take a look at our patterns and our coping mechanisms and our shadows. At the very least, if it's not going to be the worst situation that ever situationed, it's often not so extreme, because the tarot is a spectrum. It could literally just be like you're having a bad day, or what's happening is there's some kind of imbalance, like the system you created for your business isn't working and you need to build another system, or the way you set up the chore wheel in your house it's not going to work. So if the message of a 5 is coming up and we are specifically utilizing the tarot to predict, which of course is one of the ways I use it. That's what it was invented for. A way to check in with your free will, where you'll be going, where you'll be learning next. It's usually a kind of wake-up call of like, okay, this isn't working. This system, this structure isn't working. I got to change. I have to try something different, because there's absolutely something better, something that will serve me, something that will be more spacious or more aligned or feel better once I go through a process of rearranging and balancing. So let's pause and think about this year, this 5-year. Do you see any similarities with your 5-year in some of the themes I just described? Yeah, I'm sure you do. Friends, this year was incredibly rough. I might call this year unrelenting, because even if your personal year was great, and for so many it was, new jobs, new friends, new projects, moves, so on, so forth, it was all done with the backdrop or in the forefront of a terrible pandemic, with all of us feeling the effects of climate change under a deeply not okay political situation, with so many of us understanding more than ever that the systems as they were created, are abusive. And part of that abuse is that they do not allow space for our full humanity, our full rest and restoration, our full expressions. And among those expressions are grief, compassion, care, and systems and structures that center all of that, which of course brings me to the 5 of Cups. So the 5 of Cups. With this archetype, we enter the realm of water, psychic ability, emotions, love, beauty, relationships, needs, heart desires, dreams, healing, imagination, intuition, intimacy, emotional vulnerability. The Cups is art that is organic, that comes from our heart, as well as spirituality. This is flow, how we achieve flow states and how we sustain them. This is our emotional life's purpose and how that's a part of our larger ocean, the larger ocean of our beingness. It's our inner worlds and how those inform our outer worlds. It's how we've learned to get our needs met. It's our emotional intelligence or sensitivities. It's caregiving, compassion, softness, how we receive. The cups are the containers for all of this. And that shows up in any number of ways. For example, maybe one way we try to get our emotional needs met is through work, like through our vocation or our job. That might not be the best container, or maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know your life. But with cups comes this question of what are the best containers for our needs, our emotions, our imagination, our intuition, our acts of service. When we find the right containers, we live in a way that feels full, where we can give, where we feel filled up with ourselves. When those containers are full, we feel content, fulfilled, and whole. And when we feel content and whole, when we love ourselves, or at the very least like ourselves and respect ourselves, we can be in service in an altruistic and an authentic way. We are available for deep, vulnerable, and intimate relationships, including the most important ones, in my humble opinion, which is the ones with ourself, with spirit, or with magic, or with the muse, or creativity, or whatever brings us love and joy and purpose and connection, and whatever reminds us of ourselves and connects us with ourselves and the greater world around us. And the 5 of Cups shows us where there's a rift, where there are leaks, where our needs haven't been met. We might be in a creative block, or feeling not only at an emotional crossroads, but an emotional dead end. When something we've poured so much into isn't pouring back into us anymore. This card can come up when something we've really invested in heart-wise, emotionally, is proving itself to be a heartbreak. Now, the basic brass tacks of this card's meanings in a traditional way, how I learned, we've got disappointment, lack of intimacy, breakups, sorrow, dreams or hopes being dashed in some way, abandonment, neglect, rejection, heartbreak, emotional manipulation, being emotionally flooded, being hung up on the past so much that we stay in it and it becomes our future, so much so that our fears from the past, like being abandoned or isolated, become our present or future. There's this real link with this card and memories, as well as some kind of feeling of being alone or washed out to sea in some way, so to speak. Like having our vulnerability or kindness or generosity be extracted or taken advantage of, like not being seen, not having your boundaries or needs met. That's really hard, right? It's hard to have a boundary or to state a need and have it be ignored or not respected. It's hard to put yourself out there, want or crave vulnerability, and not be met in the way you would like. I'm just not one of those tarot readers that feels like the 5 is an amazing card. I'm not ever going to sugarcoat anything for anyone, because tarot is life and life is tarot, and tarot reflects life. And we've all been there. Everything I'm describing, haven't you been there before? Like, hasn't this been a reality in your life? It's part of the human condition, this sorrow or this yearning or this heartbreak. There's like 9 trillion gazillion songs on the radio about heartbreak or not having our needs met or not being seen or needing to learn how to love ourselves or needing to learn how to fill our cup. And it's just part of what we do as human beings. This is how we learn. This is how we grow. This is what we at least go through. A lot of the roots of this 5, in my humble opinion, gets linked back to our childhoods, or of being raised in places that didn't acknowledge us in the way we needed them to. And so then we take our coping mechanisms or what we learned to survive, whether that be people pleasing or high achievement or not rocking the boat or not having any emotional needs. We take those coping mechanisms into our adult lives because it's what we know, whatever it is. It's not our fault. I'm not saying it's anyone's fault. I'm not saying it's our parents' fault. I'm not saying it's ours. Like, it's just what happens sometimes. It's just usually where our defensiveness comes from. It's usually where our coping mechanisms come from. Now, when we're looking at the 5 of Cups, thinking about that Smith Rider-Waite rendition, I will call that rendition the inner goth card. I also call it, I was looking for a job, but then I found a job. I think we've all been there. And also, I sometimes think of this inner goth. By the way, this is not a judgment statement on goths. I love goths. I am part goth. I took a DNA test. It said I was at least 18% goth. So this is a goth friendly place. I'm just letting you know. But with that inner goth, there can sometimes be an attachment to suffering. I think of those Kurt Cobain lyrics, I miss the comfort of being sad. Maybe that was the norm in our families. Maybe in our families, like, things were always really hard. Maybe by having things not be okay, that kept us safe. It helped to keep us accepted. Maybe we weren't allowed to shine. Maybe we were afraid to celebrate because if we celebrated or let ourselves be carefree, we'd be punished or the good times would end. This will happen a lot in the adultification of children. Those of us who've had to be caretakers of our parents from a young age in some way. And caretaking could simply mean not being a burden, not having needs, or managing our parents' moods and or behavior by avoiding them, or being a grade A student, or even falling into the role of being the outcast, being the fuck up, being the one who is different, or the one who took the blame or whose fault it always was. The last little nickname I will have for this card is hello, darkness, my old friend. And that can become a pattern. I call it hello, darkness, my old friend, because when I see it, I'm like, hello, darkness, my old friend. Like, oh, yep, here we are again. It can sometimes be my comfort zone out of all the fives. And then that can become a pattern. It can be a pattern to stay firmly in the shadows, to be waiting or looking for things to fall apart. That's a trauma response. And it also can keep us safe in a lot of ways. It's trying to protect ourselves from heartbreak. So we maybe enact the heartbreak. Maybe we close ourselves off to joy or to things working out. Maybe we self-sabotage or don't let people really see us or don't let people love us. I shared with my students once in a class that for a really long time, I always thought that I was emotionally available and that I was dating people that were emotionally unavailable. And it wasn't true. What was true was that I was emotionally unavailable. So I dated folks who were emotionally unavailable as well. So I didn't have to be, right? Listen, it's not the best equation, but it's an equation that makes some kind of sense, It was easier to not look up and see what I was doing, to see where I was keeping myself safe. It definitely kept me from experiencing true intimacy and unconditional love for a really long time. And it wasn't until I met the person that I'm with now, who, by the way, is incredibly emotionally available. It's the healthiest relationship I've ever been in. That was when I saw, oh yeah, the calls coming from inside the house. I'm the one who had this issue. And I was able to heal it. I was able to stay. I didn't run away. I didn't isolate. Had my moments, sure did, but we're still here now. And I am in the healthiest relationship I've ever been in, one I never thought I could be in, I don't think. And I think that's part of it too, not even allowing yourself to dream. And so you can protect yourself from that heartbreak. That's what can come up. And so the Five of Cups could absolutely illustrate a pattern like that. And if you're getting this card and it's underscoring a particular familiar zone you're in, hello, darkness, my old friend, step back and ask yourself where you might be playing into a particular role. Where are you choosing protection over intimacy? Where are you self-sabotaging yourself, robbing yourself of joy? The cups are also about the subconscious. And when we're repatterning, we have to do some digging into our subconscious, and we have to do some unraveling or some excavation and some composting. The Five of Cups comes up when we are looking for things outside of ourselves to make us happy or make us feel loved or included. And we all do this. We all do this because we're relational. And the prompt with the Five of Cups is to go underneath the surface to see what the real need is there and how can we meet that need. In my own practice, this card resonates a lot with being in the state of postpartum, creative postpartum, new job postpartum, and of course, sure, baby postpartum. It comes up when there's been this expectation that getting something or putting something out there is going to solve some issue. And when the reality doesn't meet that expectation, we're in something I call having toxic expectations. And toxic expectations, as I'm sure you're aware of, can cause a lot of suffering. If we hinge our happiness on, honestly, really anything external, or expect certain relationships or certain things to solve us or make us feel worthy, that can be very often a recipe for disaster. When we expect things from others who've shown themselves to be unable to give us what we want, that's a recipe for a lot of hurt. And this card often pops up when we've come to the end of the road around an emotional pattern where we're looking at it, we're in the muck of it, we're like finally realizing that this isn't going to give us this thing we thought we had wanted, or give us this thing we wanted, or meet a need that we have. Eventually we will feel better. But first, we've got to spend time in that emotional pain. There's no way around it. We can absolutely repattern and transform those emotions. You know, emotions are these information processing systems that help us take stock. I think they're very connected to our intuition. They help us make decisions with minimal thinking. Emotions are really important information to have. We know they're not facts. We know feelings aren't facts, but sometimes we are. Sometimes they are. Sometimes when we ignore our emotions and needs for a long time, when we put others first, we get resentful and burn out. If you are a caregiver, or if you feel most comfortable being a giver, and all you do is give and give, this card could indicate that your overgiving isn't healthy. It could be causing some energetic leaks, contributing to compassion fatigue. When we see compassion, what we see as compassion, I should say, let me start again. What we think of as compassion, especially those of us who are femme, who've been socialized as women or are feminine, it's actually not healthy. It's not compassion, actually. But for a lot of us, it's the only way we know how to get love and attention. It's the only way we know how to feel worthy. And when we don't get back the love we want, or the attention or appreciation we crave, or that we think we will get, that leads to a lot of hurt or a lot of resentment. And so when this card comes up, it could be time to take a look at that if it's resonating, and really pour into your own cup for a really long time, maybe longer than you even feel comfortable doing. Ask what you need, or change certain relationships, or step back from certain relationships that are one-sided or imbalanced. If a relationship is emotionally exhausting for years, and I'm not saying situations where folks are grieving or going through mental health stuff or, this thing called life, I'm not talking about that. But if you're constantly in relationships where you are emotionally exhausted, maybe you are the emotional processor, meaning that you emotionally process the feelings of others for them. That's totally a thing. It could be time to radically change your behavior around that. There's a reason why we put the life vest first on in a boat, or we put the mask on ourselves first on an airplane. You are not an emotional ATM. You are not a healing ATM. You are a human being. Even if you do enjoy giving, you're a human being, and you exist far beyond your ability to care for others, to give for others, or to put everyone else first. So think about that, and think about what you might need to do to shift your relationship with giving, receiving, worth, and your energy and your emotions. I want to situate this card within its sequence, meaning let's take a look at the 4 and the 6. It's a really useful thing to do when you're learning the tarot or when you just want a different perspective on the cards, to really look at the sequence of the cards. So in a previous episode, I talked all about the 4. You can check that out if you haven't already. So I'm just going to share a little bit about the 4, one of the messages of the 4 and how it relates to the 5 of Cups. So a big message, a big theme of that 4 is that of recovery. When we are in recovery, whether we're recovering our true self or an identity, or we're quitting an addiction, or recovering from an illness or betrayal, we feel really in between. It's really uncomfortable. We aren't who we were, but we aren't yet who we want to be. So much of recovery in the acute phase simply is about not doing the thing, like abstaining from the behavior, like not texting the person back or ingesting a particular substance, right? Or whatever. So we're in this really uncomfortable zone where we don't yet really know what we want, or maybe even what we like, or who we are now. We're still kind of digesting and processing the past, the situations that got us here, or our memories around it. And once we get through that first acute phase of recovery that we see in the 4 of Cups, like we're neither here nor there, we're kind of just waiting, we're in the waiting room of life, we then step into the 5, when we have given ourselves enough space to feel what's underneath, whatever it is we were doing to cover those harder feelings, those harder things up, or whoever it was that we thought we were, or whatever it is we thought our life would be, and now it's not. There's another aspect that comes up with this card, the 5 of Cups, which is that we're dropping the protector feelings. Sometimes the 4 of Cups can be around our protector feelings of anger or denial or numbness. We are dropping those protective emotions or those devices like overworking or trying to be the fixer or control or numbing or trying to keep it together or hold it all in or avoid whatever we've been doing to kind of keep whatever is underneath it from coming out. In the 5, it's all right there. We are feeling the impossible feelings. We are feeling the unspeakable feelings. We are grieving. We are understanding and confronting loss. It's one of the only things we all know will happen in life. We'll lose things. Time, love, youth, beliefs, friends, identities, and so on and so forth. And so 5 is this space. The 5 of Cups is this space where we're allowed to say yes to the impossible feelings. We're allowed to show up as we are. We're allowing ourselves to mourn, to grieve. Grief shows us what we value. As Martine Prechtel says, grief is praise. Grief shows us what we love and appreciate and what we'd really like. It shows us what is most important to us. Grief is a huge part of love. I don't know if you've ever lost someone you've loved, like really deeply, deeply loved. And I have many times. And there's always been such huge, visceral feelings of love within the grieving process, of wanting that person or animal or element or planet or past self to know how much I love them, wanting them to be able to feel how much I care, how much I appreciated them, how much I needed them. We need each other, right? The world doesn't want us to think we do, but we do. And now they're gone in some way, and we're left with that loss. The absence can feel so overwhelming. The space that is left is so vast. And I think about how grief has the function of opening up our heart so much wider, that our lives, if we don't protect ourselves, if we keep our heart open, if we keep ourselves vulnerable, our lives ultimately get larger as a result of grief. If we really let it show us what we value, if we really let it be with us, if we really let it move through us, there's a lot of information there, a lot of answers in grief, a lot of surrender in grief that is deeply humbling. It's deeply connective, deeply recalibrative, and also deeply informative. And it's also this really complex, really unspeakable type of feeling, which is another theme that comes up with the 5 of Cups, feeling the unspeakable feelings, the hardest feelings. Shame is a big one that comes up here alongside grief. If our protector feeling is anger, maybe that deeper shameful feeling is neediness. Maybe it's not safe to be needy. Or maybe it's confusion. We're not supposed to feel confused. We were always the one that knew just what to do. That's what made us feel safe, and it's what made us feel valuable and rooted. But now here we are in a totally confused state, washed out, floating. And that's where we've got to be. We've got to learn how to float, even when we feel like we're drowning. We've got to ask for help, or have a really difficult conversation, or let ourselves take a couple days off, or say, no, I can't actually do this. I can't actually show up. I'm exhausted. I'm unraveled. I'm deep in grief. And I need you. For some of us, this is the hardest thing to do, is to let all these really challenging feelings show up and hold space for them and be honest about them. Within those unspeakable feelings are often emotional dead ends as well, like what we can no longer do. The emotional coping mechanisms that have helped us, but now they don't help us anymore. How we might need to not be angry all the time, or not numb out all the time, or how treating ourselves when we feel a certain kind of way isn't serving us. We've got to give ourselves compassion. Absolutely, we have to take accountability when we can, when it's appropriate, of course. Huge fan of apologies and change behavior, and really trying. Huge fan of that. But if we're taking on too much responsibility, if we are blaming ourselves for things that don't really have anything to do with us, it's time to look at that. It's time to look at what is underneath. In this card, not all is lost, but we can't quite see it yet. And this card isn't one of forcing the next chapter to happen yet. I've definitely heard some tarot readers really Pollyanna this card and be like, but the cups are still there. Focus on the standing cups. Yes. And sometimes we need to feel the sads, Sometimes we're just not quite there yet. You can't force an attitude of gratitude, or you can't force clarity when you're confused. Sometimes you just got to be in it. What it is an invitation to do is to figure out the right containers for your needs, emotions, desires. Like I said, cups are about containers. Maybe your heart's desires need a larger container. Maybe your relationships need a deeper bowl. And with that depth, with that larger container, we can then hold space for more complicated feelings. Oh yes, the fives and complicated feelings. Mixed emotions club, anyone? Like feeling scared about a great new relationship. How many times has that happened to you? You met someone so great, so cute, they're really into you, but you're like scared and you're like, why am I freaking out? I should be stoked. That's what everyone does in movies. Just letting yourself be with that. Or there's a new opportunity and you just don't feel great about it. And you're, in quote, supposed to feel good about it. But there's like some stuff going on. Or again, like you feel stressed out about getting something you thought you always wanted. We can't police our feelings. We can't minimize our feelings. We can't judge our feelings. And honestly, most of the time, gentle listener, our feelings are complicated. They're not supposed to be, but they are. Situations aren't only amazing and only horrible. Like our lives aren't only incredible and only horrific. Like you can have something really great going on in your life while also dealing with something that is really challenging. It's very much life. And so by naming all of that and being with that and understanding it's complicated and understanding our emotions are linked to memories in the past and societal influence and our ancestry and our lineages and ways we want to feel safe, and we could be here all day. But when we understand that we don't have to be one way or the other, we then hold space for our complexity, which is a gateway to the six. And so much has been said about the Six of Cups and like inner child healing and just healing in general and integration, because it's in the six that we see those two cups that are still upright become this loving exchange. We see this emotional reciprocity. It's this rebalancing and emotional turning of the corner that we see in the six. In inner child healing or reparenting the self, it can look any number of ways. It could mean soothing and comforting the self in appropriate ways. It could look like giving yourself things you always wanted or never had, like a room of your own, or the ability to voice an opinion, or stating a preference or a boundary, or listening to your intuition and leaving situations when they don't feel good. It could look like being vulnerable with folks you trust, or actively cultivating intimate relationships. It could look like gazing at yourself in the mirror and telling yourself that you love yourself and it's going to be okay, or that you're not going to abandon yourself again. Because a lot of times what the fives can be about is about how there's a situation where there's heartbreak or there's betrayal. And really what happened, where a lot of the grief comes up, is in you kind of betraying yourself or you abandoning yourself. And so when the Five of Cups comes up, you can say to yourself, I will not abandon you. I will not abandon you ever again. I'm here. I'm here for you. I'm here for all of it. Inner child healing is also giving yourself permission to have a childhood now, to give yourself time for hobbies or activities that bring you joy or play. What did you need when you were younger? when you were a child or a teenager or a young adult? Did you need to be protected, complimented, celebrated? Did you need to be listened to deeply, asked what you would like, told how beautiful and capable you are? Really think about that as we wrap up the year. What do you need? And how can you ask for it or give that to yourself? It is completely appropriate to want to be loved, to want to be seen in the ways that you need to be, in the ways that you are. It's a baseline to want to be supported, cared for, nurtured, given compassion and not punishment. Five of Cups says those are beautiful needs, and you can have those needs. You just have to do the work, the process of finding different ways or different containers to help you. First step, you need to feel. You need to feel your feelings, make space for those complicated feelings, and you have to relate to your feelings and yourself differently. Maybe that means when someone is mean to you, you aren't mean to yourself. You're not taking the blame. Maybe that means to stop waiting for a relationship or a job or the approval of your family to define who you are or make you feel worthy. Maybe it's time to stop confusing attention or attention that dysregulates your nervous system, like when you were younger, with love. Whatever's coming up for you when you get this card, again, these core message is to make space for yourself, for the loss, for the grief, for the complexity, long enough to experience them in a different way. The message is to figure out how to fill your own cup and find the appropriate outlets for you, for your heart, for your uniqueness. The message here is to figure out how to dissolve shame, especially shame around having needs or desires or wanting to be intimate or wanting to connect or wanting to be respected or whatever you feel shame around. Because you are completely, inherently worthy. So, my loves, it's the end of the year. You are most likely feeling complicated feelings. There could be regret next to excitement, grief next to joy, relief next to trepidation, or a whole mix of them. Name them, sit with them, let them speak to you, be in dialogue with them, and be kind and compassionate with yourself as we close up this complicated, challenging year. You can ask yourself, what's underneath my protector feelings? What information does my intuition and emotions have for me now? Is it time to change an emotional pattern? What memories or past situations is this linked to? What can my grief teach me or share with me around what is most important about my life? What containers are not working anymore? What containers are working? Where do I need more space in my life? Where do I need to give myself more compassion, more love, more sweetness? How do I make peace? with what I've lost? Or whatever other questions are coming up for you now. That's what I've got. Hope it resonated. Hope it helps put this archetype in perspective. This very human, very profound experience of being alive. Be good to yourself. Be good to others. Bye for now. Moonbeaming is brought to you by The Moon Studio. It is created and hosted by me, Sarah Faith Gottesdiener. Additional assistance is provided by Hazel Frew. Sound art is by Will Owen. And the show is supported by the Moon Studio's Patreon. Thanks so much for your support. If you like this podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, and tell a friend. It's much appreciated. Thanks for being here.